ब्रह्माक्षर समाम्नायम् अधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां गुण्यां करोम्यहं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुदी। अग्रिमं शिवसूत्रम् अस्ति शषसर. So the next Shiva Sutra in the order is Shashasar. Sh, Sh, S. So just the three letters. Sh, Sh, S. Ityetan varnan upadishya. Purvanscha ante upadishya. Repham itam karoti pratyaharartham. Tasya grhanam bhavati panchabhihi pratyaharaihi. So we have 5 pratyaharas: yar, jhar, khar, char and shar. So tatra yaronnasikenu va iti sutram purvasmin varge 2 classes ago we saw it in details. Atra yaraha ityasya sthane halonunasikenu nasiko va iti uchyate ched केवलम अतिव्याप्ति दोषः आगच्छति, अन्यः कोऽपि दोषः तत्र न विधीयते इति आशयः. Let's take a look at the next pratyaharas. We have the jhara pratyahara, we have the khara pratyahara, chara pratyahara and shara pratyahara. So 5 of them we took a look at first. The next one is jhara pratyahara. As you can see, the jhara pratyahara essentially starts with jhabhain ghada dhash. So varga tritiyas, varga dvitiyas, varga prathamas and sh, sh, s. So h is not included. Sh, sh, s. R pratyahara is used in sutra like jharo jhari savarne. I think you might have already studied jharo jhari savarne. Krishnardhi ityatra द्वित्वस्य एकस्य वर्णस्य लोपः भवति, कृष्णर्धि इति भवति. हलः परस्य झर् वर्णस्य सवर्णे झर् वर्णे परे विकल्पेन लोपः भवति. So for example, you can see over here when you have ta plus ta plus ta, the middle ta is removed, so you have ta plus ta. Or you have say na plus da plus dha, the middle da is removed, pindhi, and so on. You can take a look at this. कृष्णार्धि इति उदाहरण सामान्य रूपेण प्रायेण छात्रैः आदिमेषु वर्गेषु दृश्यते. सो कृष्णार्धि इत्यत्र र द ध इति अस्ति, द द इज रिमूव्ड, सो कृष्णार्धि इति भवति. सो आई थिंक यू हैव ऑलरेडी studied this is much earlier, 73. So झरो झरि सवर्णे. तदनन्तरम् अग्रे विद्यते खर इति प्रत्याहारः. Again very familiar to us. खरिच Vavasane. We have seen this pratyahara kharicha vavasane. This sutram is already familiar to us. So udpatati tatra dakarasya sthane chartve takaraha bhavati utpatati. So that is example of vavasane. Not kharicha technically, it's example of vavasane, but it's essentially the same thing. The khar pratyahara actually continues over there. Tatra khar pratyahara eva avashyakah. So khar is a very important pratyahara. Karkasha vyanjanas are categorized under khara pratyahara. So two most pratyaharas in the vyanjanas, we have hash, which is all the mrudu vyanjanas, and the counterpart is khara. Hash and khara together constitute all the vyanjanas. Hash are the mrudu vyanjanas, khara are the karkasha vyanjanas. When the karkasha vyanjana is present in front, you get a chartva. So ud plus patati, ut patati, or ut karoti, ut tapati, and so on. Why do you need a khar letter over there? Ud plus gacchati, tatra ut gacchati tina bhavati. So if there is no khara letter, the chartva will not happen. So kharicha vavasane requires a khara letter. If you have a mrudu vyanjana, if you have a hasha letter, ut gacchati, you don't get that corresponding chartva over there. So that was about the khara pratyahara. The next is the chara pratyahara. I don't think you might have studied this. Have you studied Napadanta Dvirvachana Vare Yalopaswarasya Varnanuswara Dirgha Jaschar Vidhishu? There is a char pratyahara that occurs in that sutram. You also might have just heard or might have come across a sutram called Abhyase Charcha. Again, both these sutras are pretty complex, but in Abhyase Charcha, you might have heard Abhyas gets converted to Chara. So, for example, if you want to take the lit lakara form, the bhuta form of say phala dhatu, so you do the dvitvam, so it will be pha and phala, and the pha gets converted to the corresponding char letter. So pa. What is char? Char letter consists of all the varga prathamas and the sh, sh, and s. The three sh, sh, s, these letters and the varga prathamas. So when you do the forms of lit lakara, you have phala iti dhatu, tatra dvitve krute pha phala iti bhavati. Tatra pha is not a char letter. Char is basically varga prathamas. So pha gets converted to the corresponding varga prathama pa, and the final form will be pa phala. Chida becomes chit cheda. So cha becomes cha, and so on. So these are examples of abhyase charcha. This is where the char letter is used. Again, not very important. We don't need to go into those details. Just the sutra and one or two examples we should be aware. The last pratyahara in the sequence is the shara pratyahara, very familiar to everybody. Vashari iti sutramasti harihi shete. So Vashari इत्यनेन विसर्गस्य विकल्पेन सकारादेशः भवितुम् अर्हति. So Visarjani isse saha will give a compulsory sakara and Va will make it optional. So that way the shara pratyahara is seen in examples like Vashari and so on. Can somebody give a counter example of Vashari? Why does Vashari require a shara pratyahara over there? Why cannot you extend and say Vakhari or anything? Or Vachari or something? Why do you need Vashari over there?
Kupho kappaucha, then that will get affected, right? Like,
But that will be only for K and P, right? You can give some other examples.
yeah, just before the shar kappa was there, so that's why.
Oh, that's why you're saying. But Kupo Kapaucha is optional, right? Kupo Kapaucha only optionally gives Jibha, Muli, and Upadmani, not compulsory.
But that is a Nitya Sutra. In that only the Visarga is also there, right, Mahodaya?
What is a Nitya Sutra over here? So basically, Kupo Kapaucha will say that when there is a K and P letter or whatever, K and P letter, the Visarga will get either Upadmaniya, Jibha, Mulya, or it will remain as Visarga, which is understandable. The question is, what happens with Vashari?
No, but if it gets extended, then with Kharavarna has apart from Ku and Pu, you have Khara Visarjaniya Visarjaniyaha, and then you have the Visarjaniyasya Saha, right? And then the Shtutvam or Shtutvam applies. So there are other sutras that will get affected.
Yeah, so that was basic answer, but that's okay. I mean, what your
वा
argument, Navini's argument
विकल्पेन
was okay.
भवति इति
That's Samyak Asti. But if you have any other letter, so for example, if you have T, for example, what would happen? Will it even happen by option? Like when you have Ramaha Tapate,
No, then it becomes
रामस्
Visarga
Ramas
becomes
Tapate, right? Ramaha Chinoti becomes Ramash Chinoti. So Vashari is giving an option over there.
that va is
So
the
what is the difference between saying Ramaha Tapati versus Ramas Tapati?
if
Okay.
there
रामः
is
तपति न भवति एव according to Panini.
So that's the misunderstanding. Why can so all the books in the world which say Ramaha Tapati, are they wrong or what? I mean, you might have studied, taught to kids, you might have studied Ramaha Tapati, Ramaha Gacchati. Are these are like wrong statement forms?
Ramaha Tapati is only if there is no samhita. It's all right in a vakya form where there is no intention of samhita.
Okay, so you don't have the Samhita over there. It is perfectly okay to say Ramaha Tapati. In the same way, it is perfectly okay to say Ramaha Shete. So what is the contribution that Vashari is actually doing? Vashari is saying that even
Vashari says
when
that even if
huh,
you have samhita, you can stay.
even when you have Samhita, there is no necessity of doing the Sandhi. That is the contribution of Vashari. Ramaha tapate is correct, or Ramaha gacchati is correct, Ramas tapate is correct, Ramo gacchati is also correct. The question is not on the validity of the forms. The point is Ramaha shete is an acceptable form even when there is samhita. In case of Ramaha plus tapate, if there is a samhita, the sandhi is compulsory. You have to do Ramas tapate. You cannot say, I have a samhita, but I will keep it Ramaha tapate. That's not acceptable. But in case of Shar letter, that is also an acceptable answer. So, Sahitayam Satyam Api Sandhihi Vikalpyate. You can say Ramaha Shete. You can say Ramaha Shashtaha. You can say Sarpaha Sarati. You can have the Visarga distinctly heard even when there is Samhita. This matters in situations where the Samhita is compulsory. In case of Ekapada, in case of Samasa, in case of Upasarga followed by Dhatu, and so on, Gati Samnya followed by Dhatu, and so on. Situations where the Samhita is compulsory, even their Sandhi is optional. That is the contribution by Vashari. Clear?
While writing a shloka, right? Vakyam, it is optional.
For writing a Vakyam, it is the Samhita is optional. For writing a shloka, writing a pada in between a pada, the Samhita is compulsory. Clear? So that is the Vashari is not a random option that is given. Option is already there. Okay. So this is true for any general sutram in the Sandhi Prakaranam. Any sutram that talks about the optional Sandhi in the Sandhi Prakaranam, you have to take it in this spirit. Sahitayam Satyam Api Sandhi na bhavati. Because if there is no Samhita, there will never be Sandhi. You don't have a need to have a sutra for that. Antimam Shivasutram Hal iti. Again, one of the most important ones. It captures all the Vyanjanas. Ha iti ekam varnam upadishya. A separate sutra has been created just for repeated reference of ha. Iti ekam varnam punah upadishya iti api vadamaha. Ha iti ekam varnam punah upadishya purvamscha upadishya ante lakaram itam karoti pratyaharartham tasya grahanam bhavati षड्भिः प्रत्याहारैः. So you have alla, example,
Anikalshit sarvasya.
hala, example, halatyam. Vala, example,
Ardhadhatukasya valadehe.
Valadehe.
not valade, ardhatukasya id valadehe. Full sutram has to be spoken. Ardhatukasya id valadehe. We studied this sutrams in significant details in the previous class. Sarvadhatuka, ardhadhatuka, idagama, all that aspects have been discussed in details. Valadihi ardhadhatuka pratyaya asti chet tasya pratyayasya idagamaha bhavitum arhati. For idagama, we never say bhavati. You cannot guarantee it. You have to look at dhatus also, set dhatu, anit dhatu, and so on. It's a complicated science. So always use the word bhavitum arhati, bhavitum shakyate, bhavitum sambhavati when it comes to idagama. The next pratyahara in the sequence is rala, slightly new pratyahara. Some important things need to be understood in this context. Ideally, I would not venture into those things, but these are part of your Sudha Teeka. So, rala iti pratyaharasya vishay kinchit idanim jnatavyam. Tasmat purvam, before we really enter the rala pratyahara, let's take the remaining two and then we'll come back to the rala pratyahara. Jhala iti agrimaha pratyahara. What is the example?
Jalam
Jalam Jashunte.
Jalam Jashunte.
Okay, jhalam jashunte. Shala is the last pratyahara. What is the example? Again, you guys have not studied this. Shala igupadhadani taksaha iti anyat lung lakarasya prakriyayam idam sutram pravartate. So, if you look at this list, four of them are extremely easy. So, anekal chitra sarvasya or alontyasya halantyam iti asti. Val ardhadhatukasya id valadehe we have studied, and jhal we have studied jhalan jashonte and so on. There is another sutram called jhalo jhali which you need to study. It is there in the Sudha Teeka. So Sudha Teeka talks about the sutram called jhalo jhali. So this is a new sutram that we want to study. Ralo vyupadha dhalade samscha is another new sutram that we want to study. And shala igupadhadani taksaha. So three new sutras, all in the last Maheshwara Sutram that we need to discuss in details. Okay, because they are there in your particular commentary. Before that, he mentioned Rudadibhyah Sarvadhatuke, which I explained in the last class. In case of Ardhadhatuka Pratyaya, there is Idagama, but only for 5 specific dhatus, which is called Rudadigana. Even the Sarvadhatuka Pratyaya gets an idagama. Roditi, Swapiti, Aniti. These are the examples. So for that, when there is a He Pratyaya of the Lot Lakara, you want an idagama. The example, that particular thing is given by Rudadibhya Sarvadhatuke. We'll come to this particular sutram once again when we look at this whole discussion. But I have given a basic idea of Rudadibhya Sarvadhatuke. What we are going to discuss is these 3 sutras, Ralo Vipadhadhalade Samsha, Jhalo Jhali, and Shala Igubadhadani Taksaha. There are a couple of things that we need to know before we jump into Ralo Vipadhadhalade Samsha, and it is the concept of Guna and Vruddhi in a Dhatu Prakriya. Now, many of you who have already studied some kind of Dhatu Prakriya are already aware of these things called Guna and Vruddhi. But for the general audience, there might be some misunderstanding and so on. So let me clarify these things from the beginning. So basically what happens is when you attach a Dhatu Pratyaya to a Dhatu, there are certain very peculiar transformations that happen in the Dhatu. So Ni Dhatu, if you attach, let's take a Tumun Pratyaya. So Ni plus Tum becomes Netum, not Nitum, Netum. So there is a transformation from E to A. Bhu plus Tum becomes Bhavitum, not Bhutum, Bhavitum. So there is a transformation from U to O, and then Idagama comes and O plus E becomes V, and so on. Kru plus Tum becomes Kartum, not Krutum. So these are the 3 fundamental transformations that you will see in many pratyayas. E becoming A, sometimes it will also become I, U becoming O, sometimes it will become Au, and Ru becoming Ar, like Kartum, sometimes it might become Kar also. So these transformations, they are respectively called as Guna and Vruddhi. So E becoming A, U becoming O, and Ru becoming Ar is called Guna. E becoming I, U becoming Au, and Ru becoming R are called Vruddhi. These are the fundamental transformations. We refer them collectively as Guna and Vruddhi or Guna Vruddhi. They are at the heart of many of the Dhatu Prakriyas. What happens is, for some Pratyayas, this kind of transformation is not desired. The way Panini tells us that this transformation should not be done for this Pratyaya is by adding an Itsamyaka Kakara in that Pratyaya. So if you hear an Itsamyaka Kakara in a Pratyaya, that is an indication that you do not do these kind of special transformations. If there is no Kakara, so for example, Aniyar iti Pratyaya hasti, there is no Kakara over there. So you are free to do this transformation. So Ni plus Aniya, Ni will become Ne, that's called Guna, E will become A, and then Ne plus Aniya, Nayaniya, normal Ayadi Sandhi will happen. Bhu plus Aniya, Bhavaniya. Kru plus Aniya, Kru will become Kara, Karaniya. So as long as there is no kakara in the pratyaya, you are free to do these kind of special transformations. They are called as guna or vruddhi. In general, you do guna, vruddhi are even a special case. We will keep it aside, but you are free to do that guna. And if there is a kakara in that pratyaya, you don't do that particular guna. So kta is an example, or ktwa is an example. So ni plus kta doesn't become neta, it becomes nita. Because ka is there in that pratyaya, the transformation is blocked. So nita iti bhavati. Bhu plus kta, bhuta iti bhavati. Bhavita iti na bhavati. Bhuta iti bhavati. So compare and contrast this. Bhavitum versus bhuta. Netum versus nita. Kartum versus kruta. Not karta. Kruta. The transformation does not happen. Similarly, ktva pratyay also. Nitva, not netva. Krutva, not kartva. Bhutva, not bhotva or bhavitva or whatever. So the takeaway message is that the general rule is that you do the guna and vruddhi. Guna, let's keep vruddhi aside, it's a special case. You do guna wherever it is possible, but if the pratyaya has an itsamnyaka kakara, it can be in the beginning, it can be in the end, but it has to be have an itsamnyaka kakara, then this transformation is blocked. Clear so far? So this is the framework in which this sutram ralo vyupadad halade samsha operates. That's why he says ralo vyupadad halade samsha iti kitvartham. So this is some kit akid business that I just mentioned. That is the framework in which this ralo vyupadad halade samsha operates. This sutram is actually a family of many sutras. It is one sutram in the family of many sutras that occur in the beginning of 1.2. Some of you who might have memorized 1.2 might have memorized these various sutras. So what these sutras occurring at the beginning of 1.2 say? They give a very peculiar characteristic. Tva pratyaya is technically a kita pratyaya. What does it mean? The guna will not happen. Ni becomes nitva, bhu becomes bhutva, kru becomes krutva. But under certain circumstances, the ktva pratyaya forgets that it is kita and it will behave as if it is not kita at all. What are those circumstances? These are given by these various sutras in the beginning of 1.2. So, केषुचन स्थलेषु क्त्वा प्रत्ययः कित् अस्ति परन्तु कित् नास्ति इति स्वीकृत्य एव तस्य प्रक्रिया भवति. Kid nasti means what? You will do the guna, whatever, E will become A and U will become O and so on. So a simple example is say diva. What is the ktva pratyanta form of diva? It is devitva, not divitva, devitva. So diva plus ktva, the E present in the middle of diva, it's not at the end, it's in the upadha place. The E present in diva becomes A, that is also guna. Just like ni becomes ne in netum, di will become de. And when the ktva pratyaya is added, even though the ktva pratyaya is a kit pratyaya, there is a special sutram in 1.2 that will make ktva pratyaya forget its kit property and say diva plus ktva. There is an idagama sitting over there. Diva plus e plus ktva devitva iti tatra rupam bhavati. So there are various sutras in the beginning of 1.2 which will say that a ktva pratyaya will behave as if it is not kita. Which kind of ktva pratyaya? A ktva pratyaya which gets an idagama. Not all ktva pratyayas. Yatra yatra ktva pratyayasya idagamaha bhavati saha ktva pratyayah kit nasti ityeva svikurmaha. So the sutram in the beginning of 1.2 is naktva set. Very important sutram. Naktva set. Simple to understand. No. We are talking about kit property. This kit is coming as an anuvritti all the way from beginning of 1.2. As I mentioned, 1.2 is all about kit making a kit. So kit which comes all the way from 1.2.5 asanyoga lit kit. So all the way from there kit comes as an anuvritti till 1.2.26, 27 and so on. All that we are saying is ktva pratyaya which is having an idagama is not to be considered kita. So vrutta dhatu, for example, the ktva pratyanta form of vrutta dhatu is not vrutitva, it is vartitva. Compare and contrast it with the kru dhatu. Kru becomes krutva, vrutta becomes vartitva. Why? Because there is an idagama sitting over there. When the idagama comes, the kit property is forgotten. Therefore, the pratyaya behaves like a normal pratyaya, which means there will be the guna happening. Like likha becomes lekhitum. Tuman pratyaya is not at all kit pratyaya. So that form will have a guna. Likha will become lekha, lekhitum. In the same way, vrutta will become vartitva. And this is only for set. So kru dhatu tatra idagamaha na bhavati. So then you don't say karatva, you say krutva. ru dhatu tatra idagamah na bhavati, so you say rutva. Clear so far? So this is a general statement. What is a general statement? The twa pratyaya, which is a set, which gets an idagama, is not to be considered kita. Now there are certain apavadas and certain vikalpas presented on naktva seta. So naktva seta is a general statement, and then you have multiple apavadas, multiple nishedhas, multiple vikalpas presented on naktva seta. One of those vikalpas on naktva seta is this particular ralo vyupadhad halade samscha. So what does naktva seta say? Naktva seta says that if the tva pratyaya is seta, if there is an idagama, then kitva property which blocks the guna is forgotten. Ralo vyupadhad halade samsha says that kitva property is only optionally forgotten. So where a niyam, a forced forgetting is being told by naktva set, it is only made optional by ralo vyupadha dhalade samsha for a specific set of dhatus. The dhatus which end in the ral pratyahara. If the dhatu, that's why I specifically gave an example of the diva dhatu in my initial discussion, because diva does not end in rala pratyahara. Rala is what? Ha, ya, va. So you reject three letters from the beginning and you include ha at the end by hala. So only ya and va are removed. So all dhatus that do not end in ya and va, halanta dhatus obviously. All halanta dhatus that do not end in ya and va. Think of anything else. Say likha, for example. It ends in a khakara. It does not end in say ya or va. So it ends in the letter of the rala pratyahara. Rala pratyahara is everything other than ya and va. So rala pratyahara yasya ante asti. Tathacha E or U is in the Upadha. So there are three conditions written in this sutram. Ralo Vyupada Dhalade Samsha. Very simple sutram actually. It looks difficult, but there is nothing. So three conditions. First condition is that the dhatu must begin with a hala letter. So it must be haladi. So that's the last part. Ralaha. Look at the padacheda. Ralaha Vyupadhat haladehe. So the third word says haladi. The dhatu must begin with a hal letter. It must end in the ral letter. The initial letter must be a hal letter. The middle letter, which is a swara, must be either e or u. So that is the meaning of v upadhat. E and u, that's being combined together. So E and U together, one of these must be the middle letter and the Rala must be the last letter. Rala pratyahara, everything other than ya and va. So let's take example of likha dhatu. What is at the beginning? There is a la which is at the beginning. So it is haladi. What is in the middle? There is an ikara in the middle. So vyupadha. Vyupadha means either e or u must be in the middle. How is this word v formed? U plus e, not e plus u. U plus e. Sadhu plus iti becomes a sadhviti. So you hear that v, right? So that's v that is coming over here. Sadhu plus iti will be sadhviti. Now get rid of sa, get rid of ti. It will be dvi, and then get rid of the. It will be v. So essentially, when you combine u plus e, it gives you v. So v upadhat means ukaraha upadhayam asti, no chet ikaraha upadhayam asti. So tatra likha iti dhatuh asti. It begins with the la, which is the hala letter. There is an e, which is one of e and u. So vyupadhat condition is satisfied. Sadagopanji, you had a question.
This in the Padacheda, we are saying Rasva V Upada, but Kasika says Dirgha V. Is there a spelling mistake in the Padacheda? Should it read as Dirgha V?
No. That's a good observation. So Uscha Ishcha V, he is doing a dvivachana. So munihi muni munayah. So vihi vi vayah. So while explaining it, he is doing the dvivachana. But when you are doing a samasa v plus upadha, you cannot put a dvivachana in the samasa. You have to use the pratipadika. So the pratipadika is the v with a hasva ikar. Clear?
Okay, okay. Yeah, got
Got
it.
it right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
So let's complete the likha. So la, e, and kha is there at the end. I was trying to reach that. So kha is in the rala pratyahara. So that's ralanta. So ral is at the end. So kha is at the end. So likha is a kind of dhatu that fits this particular configuration. Another example, miller. So ma, e, and la. Buddha, ba, u, and dha, and so on. So many examples are there. So in such cases, the twa pratyaya is optionally kita. What the earlier rule said, it is never kita. That has been blocked. Optionally kita. So if it becomes kita, then guna will not happen. So likhitva will be the correct form. If it does not behave like kita, then guna will happen and lekhitva will be the final form. So for the likha dhatu, the ktva pratyayanta forms are likhitva as well as lekhitva. Both of them are correct. Why? Because of the sutram ralo vyupadha dhalade samscha. Forget about sun and cha. We do not want to. We have enough complexity already. There is no need to go into extra complexity. So look at the examples in Kashika. Dyuta, dyota. So dyuta, it is haladi. There is an ukara in the upadha. So u and ta. So it's ralanta. So dyutitva versus dyotitva. Both the forms are acceptable. Understand, idagama must happen. There is a basic condition. It's all about cases where idagama happens. Another example he has given, likhitva versus lekhitva. Likha becomes a lekha because the pratyay is only optionally kita. And this rala pratyahara requires a h. You cannot just end it at shashasar and say rar. You have to extend it and you say hala is to be included. So rala, why? Because we also get examples for hakara. Sniha becomes snehitva and snihitva. What is a sniha? It is haladi dhatu. There is an ikar present before the end and there is ha at the end. Ha is a crucial member of rala pratyahara. We want ha in the rala pratyahara. The final forms are snihitva and snehitva. Therefore, the rala pratyahara contains or must contain hakara. Clear about the ralo vyupadhadhalade samsha sutram? So we will revisit this sutram when we talk about hakara specifically. But at this stage, all that we are talking about is hala sutra. There is a rala pratyahara made using this sutram. An example is ralo vyupadhadhalade samsha. The examples of this sutram are likhitva, lekhitva, dyutitva, dyotva, snihitva, snehitva, and so on.
Mother, I have two questions. So one is the dhatu has to be sate, is what you said, right? But is sneha dhatu sate?
So we don't talk about dhatus being sate or not. As I mentioned earlier also,
Both the
would
dhatu
be
and the pratyaya. The dhatu has to be sate and the pratyaya has to be idanukula, right?
that's what I did not say. That's exactly what we don't want to avoid, all that kind of terminology. So idagama is a kind of complex venture. So all that we say is whether idagama happens or whether idagama does not happen. Whether it happens magically, whether the dhatu is set, whether the pratyay is id yogya, is all complex analysis. We will not go into it. All that we are saying is what is the final result. Idagamaha bhavati uta na bhavati. If idagama happens, then all these non-kith transformations might be applicable. If idagama does not happen, then these transformations might not be applicable. So if you see sniha dhatu, it is actually weight, which means that in some cases idagama will have some. In the sense, you have an option. Idagama might happen, idagama might not happen. But we don't care about the property of the dhatu. All that we care is that whether the idagama happens or not happens. There are situations, I'm digressing a little bit, but there are situations, kru dhatu, for example, the dhatu is anit, but still you see karishati. So idagama happens there. So idagama is an extremely complex business. There are 70 sutras, 728 to 7 to 78 for idagama. So do not treat it just like a binary analysis. Is dhatu set versus anit, is pratyay idyogya versus not. That's only for initial discussion.
Astu. And then the second question is, if you say that likhitva and lekhitva, but we never really see lekhitva, right? But, is that a shuddha?
Obviously, you just last
Yeah.
studied the sutram, right? Ralo vyupada dhalade samsha.
But
The
we
vyakyanas
never
say
see it,
likhitva versus likhitva, isn't it?
but we never see it in any of the.
That's because you are not exposed. You are not exposed to a significant array of literature, or that's
Okay.
because you have not like used to the language. You
Right.
have not studied something. Does I mean this is not targeted to you. I'm just talking in general. You have not studied something does not necessarily mean that it is not a valid form. What you might say is that the literature that we have come across, you don't see that form. That's a different. The frequency of usage is not a discussion that we usually do when we talk about the
Yeah, and
sadhutva of the forms. Correct?
even in other things like books and whatever this where they provide these kind of dhatu forms
Oh,
of.
no. In all the books where they provide dhatu forms, there will be lekhitva, otherwise there is a typing mistake. Let's go to the likha dhatu on the website. Prudanta, likhitva versus lekhitva. It has to be there. I mean, it is not found in the literature, that's a different discussion. But if there is a dhatu form book and if it does not specify lekhitva, there is a mistake. That's outright. There is no question other than that. Open all your books that you have and there will be lekhitva over there. And this is such a fundamental sutram, Ralo Vipada Dhalade Samsha. The people who create those books will never miss this sutra.
Okay.
And specifically, likha dhatu, the form is there in the commentary. So, which means that there is no other apavada that we are forgetting, nothing like that. I mean, there are 27 sutras, but the form for likha is right there in the commentary, which means it is correct.
So maybe it's
Okay?
just something that I have never noticed and never kind
Yeah,
of.
you can definitely, after the class, open the book and see, you will definitely find these things.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, it happens. I mean, just because we are not used to a form, we
Mm.
think that it is not a valid form, but it is a very equally valid.
Astu, Kshamyata.
This is not for kta pratyay. Likha plus ta is always likhita. There is no lekhita. This special condition is only for ktva pratyayas, not for the kta pratyay. Ralo vipada dhalade samsha is only the ktva and san pratyay, obviously, but you can keep that aside. Any further questions on the rala pratyahara?
Mahdi, I have a question. What is
Yes,
the
Umaji.
significance he takes who first, who and ye, who'scha, ye'scha? Because in 143 he takes use triyakyo nadi. Atra he takes
Yeah,
ye
and
first.
va.
Yeah. Yes.
So the correct answer to this question, why does he give an order of u plus e, is alpaksharatvam. If you break down this word, so what are the two choices? We can have ralo vyupadhat halade samsha, or you can have ralo yupadhat, the dirgha happens, halade samsha. So if you take these individual words, vyupadha versus yupadha, it is easy to calculate that vyupadha has a total of 5 matras, whereas the yupadha has a total of 5.5 matras. There is a dirgha ukara which counts towards 2 matras instead of 1. So the total number of matras for yupadha is 5.5. The total number of matras for vyupadha is 5, and therefore it is logical, or it is better to use vyupadha, which saves you half a matra. So alpaksharatvam, you can see a very beautiful example of alpaksharatvam over here. He uses vyupadha and saves half a matra. On the contrary, in use triakhyo nadi, whether it is e plus u or u plus e, essentially the number of matras don't change. You can work it out. So he keeps the normal sequence, normal ordering, and says e and u. So use triakhyo nadi. But here, because he is able to save half a matra, he will revert the order and he will say ralo vyupadha dhalade samscha. Is that clear?
Yes, Mahodaya.
The next sutram that I want to discuss in this particular order is this one, Jhalo Jhali. So that Jhala Pratyahara is again present. We have seen a simple case like Jhalan, Jashonte and so on, but Jhalo Jhali is there in your Sudha Teeka. So let's talk quickly about Jhalo Jhali. Again, I don't want to go into extra details. I will only specify things that are really needed at this particular stage. So Jhalo Jhali Sutram is a very specific sutram about Lung Lakara. So Jhalo Jhali is a special sutram which is applicable only to the Lung Lakara. In case of Lung Lakara, in the previous class I discussed that you have a Chili Vikarana Pratyaya. So there is a very specific Vikarana Pratyaya called Chili. The sutram is Chili Lungi. So in case of Lung Lakara, there is a Chili Vikarana Pratyaya, which means that if you take a dhatu, say Bhu dhatu, and if you add a Lung Lakara, say Tip Pratyaya or whatever, the first thing that will appear is the Chili Pratyaya over there. And this Chili Vikarana Pratyaya, it gets converted into 5 different options. It's not like one Vikarana Pratyaya and everything else flows smoothly, but this Chili Vikarana Pratyaya can get converted to various other forms. Sometimes it becomes a Sicha, sometimes it becomes Ang, sometimes it becomes Ksa, K plus Sa, sometimes it becomes something else, and so on. So I want to show that particular section. So we say Chili Lungi, which means that in the Lung Lakara, there is a Chili Vikarana Pratyaya that comes. So Chili Lungi gives the Chili Vikarana Pratyaya in case of Lung Lakara. That is always your starting point. So you say Patha plus Chili plus whatever Tip plus G, whatever you want to add, and then the further Prakriya happens. Now what happens is when this Chili Pratyaya is added, in the next step, there are multiple Adeshas that Chili can undergo. So only one Adesha at any particular Prakriya, but there are multiple choices. So you can have an Adesha called Sicha. There is a sutram called Shlehe Sicha. You can have an Adesha called Sicha. You can have an Adesha called Ksa for some dhatus. You can have an Adesha called Shanga. That's third, yet another Adesha. You can have an Adesha called Anga. So that's the fourth Adesha. And you can have another Adesha called as a China. So that's the fifth Adesha. So for certain dhatus, there will be one Adesha. For some other dhatus, there will be second Adesha. For some dhatus, there will be third Adesha. So 5 different Adeshas for this Lung Lakara have been given. That's why the Prakriya of the Lung Lakara is extremely complex. First, you need to think which Adesha happens and then there will be further Prakriya changes over there. Therefore, Lung Lakara form, in fact, there are 12 different methods by which the Lung Lakara forms can be created. Extremely complex Prakriya. And the reason why there is so much complexity is that the complexity originates at the place of Vikarana Pratyaya itself. There are 5 different options and you have to select one. So the sutram Jhalo Jhali that we are talking right now is about this Sicha Vikarana Pratyaya. This sutram is involved only in the cases where the Chili is converted to Sicha. What is Sicha? The Cha is its samyaka, is Iccharanartha, both go away, only Sa remains. So even when Chili becomes Sicha, the visible form is a Sa. Now that's place where the Jhalo Jhali Sutram comes in. The Jhalo Jhali Sutram says that if this Sa Vikarana Pratyaya is sandwiched between a Jhal letter on one side and Jhal letter on another side. Jhalo, Jhali. Jhalaha is Panchami, Jhali is Saptami. Same Pratyahara has been used as Purva Nimitta and Paranimitta. The Purva Nimitta is in the Panchami, Jhalaha. The Paranimitta is in Saptami, Jhali. Same Pratyahara. Need not be same letter. It might be different letter to the left and different letter to the right, but it must be both of these letters must belong to the Jhala Pratyahara. So if there is a letter of Jhala Pratyahara to the left and if there is a letter of Jhala Pratyahara to the right, and if there is a Sa which is sandwiched between these two Jhala, in the prakriya of lung lakara, then this sa is removed. Tasya lopaha bhavati. So if you look at the sutram jhalo jhali, the sutram says jhalah uttarasya. So left hand side must be jhala. Sakarasya. Here you only say sakara, but I'm telling it is only for the sicha. He clarifies it ahead. This is only for the sicha, which is the lung lakara business. So jhalah uttarasya sakarasya jhali parataha. When there is another jhal in front of it, lopa happens. So jhalah uttarasya sakarasya, a sa which is sandwiched between two jhalas is removed. What is the example? Abhitta. Bhida iti dhatu asti. Now we will not go in the further prakriya, but you imagine that there is an adagama which can be ignored for now. There is a bhida dhatu and there is a ta pratyaya. Atmane pada prathama purusha ekavachana ta atamjha. So ta pratyay is there. So you have bhida which is on the left, you have ta which is on the right, and there is a chili in between which has become sicha, and sicha has become sa. E and ch has gone away. So look at the configuration: bhida followed by sa followed by ta. So this sa is now sandwiched between the on one side and the on another side. Sa is sandwiched between two jhal letters. In such a case, jhalo jhali sutram will kick in and it will get rid of the middle sakara, giving the final form a bhida plus ta, abhitta. So that's the example that is given over here. Abhitta. What is the construct? Bhida is on the left side or abhida is on the left side. Sa is in the middle. The pratyaya ta is towards the end. Because sa is sandwiched between the on one side, which is jhala, and ta on another side, which is again jhala, sa is removed. That's the sutram jhalo jhali. You get abhidata, abhitta. Similarly, abhithaha. On the right side, the pratyaya has changed. Instead of ta, it is thaha. Thas. Doesn't matter, it's still jhala. Same sutram will kick in. So abhithaha. This is the jhalo jhali sutram. Basically, it is difficult. One might not even need it only if you want to study the jhala pratyahara. But this sutram has been quoted in Sudha Teeka to tell you why ha must be there. So he has an example of hakara. Daha iti dhatuho asti. Daha dhatoho vishaye api asya sutrasya prayoga ishyate. So you have daha, adagama will be there. You have daha and you have tam. Say ta tam an. So tam pratyaya is there. So daha plus tam pratyaya is there. If there is a chili in the middle, chili would become sicha, sicha will become sa. So observe the configuration. Daha. So there is a ha on the left, sa in the middle, and ta to the right. Again, you want to get rid of sa. The only way to get rid of that sakara is by jhalo jhali. That is possible if the jhala pratyahara contains hakara. Therefore, the jhala pratyahara must contain hakara. Only when such a possibility is there, the sa can be removed, because on left side there is a ha, which is a jhala. On the right side there is a ta, which is a jhala. So sa can be removed by jhalo jhali. Further prakriya will happen and a dagdham is the form that will be created. You do not need the prakriya at this stage. All that you need to know is that the left side jhala is actually the ha letter, and that particular prakriya is possible because ha is included in the jhala pratyahara.
Can you give an example where the sa is not removed, Mahodaya? Like I haven't.
In lung lakara prakriya, many times an idagama will come. Look at this. The sa that you hear in apatishtam or apatishtam is basically sicha. So patha plus sicha plus tam, this sa is all the way heard here is tam. There is an idagama and then there is a stam over here. So there is no jhala letter on the left. There is an e on the left. So you do not get the jhalo jhali sutram over here.
Dhanyavad.
Clear? What happens in apatith is different. So Ita iti is this another reason, another sutram that is getting rid of is in the same sequence. Jhalo jhali, then there is Hraswa Danga, then ita iti. So there is a set of sutras that will get rid of the s. So in aparthith, this ita iti is applicable, but the aparthishtam is a valid example. Let me repeat, you don't need to study these sutras in details. This is pretty advanced, but because your commentary mentions it, you need to understand the importance of in jhala, and this is an example. So jhal pratyahare hakarasya kimartham upasthitihi avashyaki. The jhalo jhali sutra has a jhal pratyahara and it requires hakar. This argument cannot be applied for jhalan jashonte because for even before jhalan jashonte comes in, ha has become dha by hod ha. So the purpose of her in Jhal is not explained using Jhalam Jashunte, but it can be explained by Sutra Jhalo Jhali. Let's go to the last Pratyahara, Shal. The sutram that is quoted in your commentary is Shala Igubadhadani Taksaha. This is again related to the Lung Lakara. This essentially talks about the second type of Adesha of Chili. So you always start with Chili. Let's go to this Chili Lungi once again. You always start with the Chili as the Vikarana Pratyaya. And in Lung Lakara, Chili can have 5 different Adeshas. So Chlehe Sicha. Sicha was the first Adesha that we just saw in Jhalo Jali. The second Adesha that is possible is Ksa. And this sutram, Shala Igupadhadani Taksaha, basically tells Ksa iti Adesha kutra bhavati. So if the dhatu is a shalant, sh, sh, s, and h, shashasar and hala. If the last letter of the dhatu is a ushma letter, sh, sh, s, and h, these are the ushma letters. So if the last letter of the dhatu is an ushma letter, then the chili will be converted to ks. There are other conditions, igupadha, anita, and all that. We don't need to worry about it. If the last letter is a shala letter, then the chili is converted to ks. The way we know that there is a ks conversion happening is that the final form you hear a ksha, rakshasa or kshatriya, that ksha letter. So for example, dvisha iti dhatu asti. In the lung lakara of dvisha dhatu, you hear a dvikshat. So dvisha iti dhatu tatra ante shakarah asti. It is a shal letter, sh, sh, s, h, one of them. So the chili pratyaya will get converted to ksa and we will hear a ksha in the final form. So if you look at the prakriya, there will be some shala igupadhadani taksaha. Chili is getting converted to ksa and then obviously finally you hear a sh in that particular form. Advikshat iti bhavati. Clear? So now the shala pratyahara contains hakara. Why? Because a hakaranta dhatu like liha is also expected to get the ksa vikarana pratyaya, giving the form like alikshata. So for the liha dhatu also you have shala igupadhadani taksaha. Chli gets converted to ksa and then finally you hear a sh in the final form, alikshata iti rupam. So the sutram shala igupadhadani taksaha, there's only one sutram for this pratyahara, shala igupadhadani taksaha. So the pratyahara is shal, but in the sutra there is shalaha, so we say full l, shala igupadhadani taksaha. This sutram talks about the shala pratyahara. It says that if the dhatu ends in shala pratyahara, which is the ushma letter, only 4, sh, sh, s, h. In such a case, what you will have is the ksa conversion. Chili will get converted to ksa, and then you can hear forms like say advikshat or advikshat or alikshat and so on. Any questions on this?
The sa converted to sha is just because of the incoho, because it's The ka is only
That is
making
correct. But the
so
question is good. So inkoho is converting sir to sh, but inkoho is not because of the k of ks. This k is itsamyak. This ka is going to go away. That ka is not converting sir to sh. There is some other ka appearing in the prakriya. So if you see, for example, liha dhatu, this ka is going away by lashakva tantite. This ka cannot convert sir to sh. But towards somewhere in the prakriyas, the extra ka appears by shadhokasi. Extra ka appears, and that ka gets causes the sir to get converted to sh, and then alikshat iti bhavati. Clear?
Mahodaya.
So let's try this. The last letter of the dhatu antya is shal. So sh, and h, and the dhatu must be, or there should be no idagama. So the upadha varna must be ikara or ukara. So these are various dhatus that you see. So disha iti asti tatra adikshat. You can see again the sh coming over here. Okay, so what happens is somewhere in the prakriya there will be k appearing somewhere. Sh will become sh, will become k by shadhokasi, or h will become dh, that will become k. The sh will become k. So somewhere or the other there will be k appearing, which will cause the inkoho sutra to get applied.
So technically he could have given the ksha like the sh instead of sa itself in the adesha.
So some readings of the Sutra Patha actually do that. So some readings of the Sutra Patha say Shala Igubadhadani Takshaha. But the reason why K is present is because it has its own purpose, right? To block Guna and Vruddhi and so on. So he wants a K, and if he is adding a K, he can, even if he adds a Sh or Sh, it doesn't matter, but there has to be a K over there. But some people take it as K plus Sh, Murdhanya Sh, and they give the reading as Shala Igubadhadani Takshaha. That is also an acceptable reading of this sutra.
So even when you say the adeshas and all, like you can apply the inkoho, like when you haven't removed the itsamya, when you just say it as an adesha, do we do something like that? The sakara transforming to shakara that itself.
That's what we should not do. That's why the sutram, the correct reading is Shala Igubadhadani Taksaha. You don't say Shala Igubadha. So technically, if that thing we wanted to apply in the sutra itself, Shala Igubadhadani Ta Ka plus Sh, we should have said Shala Igubadhadani Takshaha. That is also an acceptable reading. But that is like more on a theoretical ground. That Ka is anyway going to go away. If Ka goes away, then by nimittapaye naimittikasya payaha, the sh will get converted back to s. You see, for example, stha dhatu, the way it is presented in the dhatu patha is a stha, sh plus th. Technically, there is a thakara, but because of sh, it becomes tutva, and th is presented. In the prakriya, when you say dhatvadesha saha, and when sh gets converted to sa, the nimitta by naimittikasya paya will convert th back to th, giving rise to stha. In the same way, even if your initial reading is ksha, ka plus sh, as soon as the itsamyaka ka is removed, the sh will come back to its original position called sa. So whether you do the reading as shala igupadhadani taksaha, or whether you do it as shala igupadhadani takshaha, is your choice. As soon as the itsamyaka letter is removed, it will always be shala igupadhadani ta saha. So sa is the only thing that comes over there. Is this clear?
Yeah, Mahodaya. But it might be difficult to find whether originally if it was a sa or sha, if we have already converted it.
So the point is we have to rely on the vyakhyanas for it, and I don't think if it is originally sa or sha it would matter, because eventually it always becomes sha, because in all these examples you end up with the ka. So ka will convert sa to sha. So eventually it is always sha. So whether it was starting sa or starting sha, I think it's individual choice. Then you can actually think in a reverse way. If you are anyway getting sh, Why have sh in the beginning? Let's have a precursor of it, sir, and then it will get converted to sh. That might also be one way of thinking around it. So eventually, after so many classes, we completed the Maheshwara Sutras till Shala. Still, one point is remaining, and that we will discuss in the next class. Hakarasya dvivaram upasthitihi kimartham. Why do you really need hakara for at two places? So there are two ways of arguing to that over that problem. I will give you a mathematical argument which is not related to the sutras. So there is one way to just argue it mathematically using some kind of pure logic. So I will teach you one way by which you can prove that whatever permutation combination of all those letters you do, you rearrange the pratyaharas, you rearrange, all the letters, and whatever permutation you do, her will be required two times. We will prove it mathematically. We will not actually technically use any sutras, but we will prove this mathematically. So this is one way. And then the second is you look at the individual pratyaharas and you say why hakara is needed in these pratyaharas. Some of these pratyaharas take the first hakara, some of the pratyaharas take the second hakara. So that is a more practical approach. You look at actual pratyaharas and say in this pratyahara there are letters occurring towards the end, but ha is needed. In these other pratyaharas, there are letters occurring in the beginning, but ha is needed. So ha must be present in two places. So that is another line of argument. So we will study both the lines of arguments in the next class. And if possible, we will discuss this particular first section, which should be mostly a reading because all the sutras I have explained now. So bho bhago, vibhashetaha is what we missed, but I'll talk about it next time. I explained व्याख्यानतो विशेष प्रतिपत्तिर्नहि संदेहाद लक्षणम. I explained रुदादिभ्य सार्वधातुके रलो विपदादलादि संशय झलो झली शलै गुब्धादनि टक्सः. Everything has been explained. So our plan for the next class is to understand two answers to the question why her needs to be repeated. If you want, think about it. At least the mathematical answer you should be able to come up. The mathematical answer does not need knowledge of any sutras. All that it requires is the knowledge of these pratyaharas. That this pratyahara contains her, that pratyahara does not contain her. Only that knowledge you will need. Using a little bit of logic and analysis, you can come up with one answer. The second answer will actually require an insight in the individual sutras, which is also easy because we have studied all the sutras. So there is nothing new in it. But there are two different approaches of proving that ha is required at two places. We will take a look at both the approaches. The second approach is what is explained in the Sudha Teeka. The first is pure mathematical. It is not explained, but it is fun. It will take 5 minutes, not more than that. So I will explain that. And the second approach is in the Sudha Teeka. So we will learn that approach. We will read the corresponding Vyakhyana from the book. And that way we can officially conclude the Maheshwara Sutra discussion from our course.